Welcome back to another episode of the Stop and Pop. I have a guest with me today, Ryan Carlson, who I will be talking with about the Pistons.
Yes, sir.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. So, first things first, I want to ask you: you call yourself a diehard Pistons fan.
Yes,
Where
sir.
did the fandom come from? And also, who is your favorite Piston of all time?
Ooh, that's a loaded one. So
Mm-hmm,
my fandom, so I'm from Michigan.
mm-hmm.
Most people know that Michigan is in two pieces, but not everybody knows that. So it's upper and lower. I'm actually from the upper peninsula.
I didn't know
Um,
that.
yeah, so it's about 8.5 hours from Detroit, only about 3 hours from Milwaukee. But my whole family
Mhm,
we're Michigan everything. Tigers, Lions, Pistons, Michigan. That's just
mhm.
that's just who we root for. Growing up, where I was a big MJ fan, as everybody who's an 80s baby, 90s kid was
Yeah.
pretty much. So
Mhm,
I did cheer for the Bulls kind of growing up, but my whole family cheered for the bad boys, right? So there was like as soon as
mhm,
MJ went away, it was only natural for me to like kind of just keep siding with the Detroit teams because that's what I was reading the Detroit Free Press, all
mhm.
the Detroit news. So I kept interested with that. So yeah, I've been 40 years. Yeah, I just turned 40 last year. So I've been a part, like I've been watching Pistons, listening to the Pistons since I was a little kid. And it's just part of who I am now, my DNA. So what we're going through now has been really rough. But growing up, having some of those dogs on the team that everybody loved, like the Isaiahs, Joey D, the microwave, all the way up to the Grand Hill era. I know that you're rocking that Grand
Mhm.
Hill shirt today, which
Yes,
I
sir.
love. But there's like
Hmm.
the Allen Houston era, the Junkyard Dogs. And then
Jerry Stackhouse.
you
Hmm.
got Stack. Yeah,
Hmm.
there's some people they didn't always coalesce, and we didn't always have those studs at the same time. So, but they were kind of staggered throughout the year. So even when we weren't great, watching Grand Hill was still fun. Seeing an Allen
Hmm.
Houston get drafted shortly thereafter and seeing them like, oh, there's potential there. That was still fun, even though they didn't win a whole bunch. Um, and then we get to the going to work Pistons, and like that was obviously like the epitome of fanhood because they're good every year.
Yeah.
And now we've dipped. But you asked a loaded question when you said my favorite Piston of all time.
Hmm.
That's tough. For me, it's probably going to be Ben Wallace just because of what he
Hmm.
embodied at that time, not only in the league but just for the city and everybody who rep Detroit. Like everybody wanted to be like Ben, man. Everybody wanted to fear the fro, rock the fro, wear the headbands to the games.
Yeah.
Even the starting lineup, man, when they banged that gong and it was for big,
Hmm.
like the energy and back in the day, the Palace was just electric. So I would
Yeah.
probably go with him as like the most
Hmm.
well known. But then in terms of like just like a personal fan favorite who maybe wasn't like a huge impact guy,
Hmm.
was Jerome Williams. It was the Junkyard Dog.
Oh
Because
yeah.
he was to me
Hmm.
like the first Big Ben, where he just like
Hmm.
embodied the city. It
Hmm.
was just so gritty and grimy that I was always a huge fan of Junkyard Dog.
I forgot about Junkyard Dog. I forgot he was on there for a while. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, those Detroit teams. They always been good, especially like from the '90s all the way up to when Red, Chauncey, Ben, Rasheed Wallace got there. I remember vividly watching the 2005 finals, and I thought they was going to win it all, but San
or
Antonio ended up pulling it, and I was like, man, like, this Detroit team is really good. And then they ended up making like conference finals like multiple
six
times
straight
after
years.
that.
6 straight
Hmm.
years. Yeah,
It's
and when you bring up
crazy.
the '05, I still remember I was at a Marquette sports bar in Upper Peninsula called JT Shaft. I was a
Hmm.
student at Northern Michigan University, and I don't remember. I think it was Game 6,
Hmm.
where we had the lead. It was in the Palace, and Rasheed Wallace doubles off of Robert Ory, and Ory
I
makes that
remember that.
three.
Yes.
That was the entire
Hmm.
series. We knew there's another game in San Antonio, but that was it. Like that was it.
Yeah.
That was the series right there. As we would have back to back them. That
Hmm.
was a tough. I still remember that so vividly. It like hurts my soul.
Yeah. I remember watching that game as well because I remember it was like, yo, what is he doing? And then
Right. It's
yeah,
Robert
then
Ory, man.
Robert or
Robert
exactly.
Ory in playoff time. Like, come on.
It's
Yes.
like out of
Yes.
all people.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Big Bob. Big
So
shot,
the
Bob.
so the next question I want to ask you. So the team is currently 2-25.
Yes, sir.
So if you were in charge of the team for one season, for this season,
Mhm.
what would you change? What would you do? What moves would you make?
Man, that's probably tough. The one thing that in this season has just been a complete dog pile, like in terms
Mm-hmm.
of expectations, and as a fan, I think there's a lot more vitriol and Pistons posts than I can ever remember, because we have just been kind of going along with this whole restore and rebuild, and there seems like
Mm-hmm.
there's pieces in play, and this was going to be like year 4. Now we're going to start to be competitive again, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. Like, this is what we've built. This is what we've been patient for 4 years.
Yeah.
So, and one of the most perplexing parts of this season, and for somebody who still watches like every game, um, I don't understand the lineups. I just haven't understood the lineups from the day one,
Mm-hmm.
even until now. So I think if I had to make one move with the pieces that I currently have, which I think there's going to be a lot of moves hopefully being made here that
Mm-hmm.
just give us some type of identity. I would love to see more Jaden Ivey and Cade on the floor at the same time.
Thank you.
I
Thank
don't
you.
understand. I don't understand why not. Cade is very effective in the half court. Jaden is so effective. Jaya is so effective in the open court that they can kind of play off of one another doing that. I also don't understand why the development of Isaiah Stewart has now become to the point where now he's our spot up shooter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that. Last when they play on Sunday was their last loss, but it was a competitive loss. That was probably the starting lineup that I've been wanting almost all year. It
Yeah.
was Cade, Ivy, Isiah Thompson, Bagley, because Duran's out, but he can be switched out, and then Bogdanovich. Like, that
Mm-hmm.
five to me is the Pistons probably best five. You can substitute Motown Marv for Duran, who's an upgrade. But if you had those five pieces, that's the five that I want to see play together. And then I understand that Bogan is probably going to be gone at some point because he's really like the biggest trade piece that we have. But those
Mm-hmm.
other four cats, like, they have to be on the floor together to see what you have. I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand the Killian Hayes' role, and I know he gets dogged enough online. I don't need to
Yeah,
add.
I don't understand it either, to be honest with you.
He gets so much run, he gets so much
Mm-hmm.
tick, and like it's fine at times because he is a defensive presence. He doesn't turn over the ball. He doesn't have the inconsistencies on defense that an Ivy does, but he doesn't bring anything else. He doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
anybody else better per se. And then when you have Isaiah Stewart out on the court with the Marvin Bagley, that doesn't make any sense to me because
Yeah.
he shoot a 20 anywhere from 25 to 30% clip from 3-point land. That's not going to really draw the defense out the way that an effective stretch four does, because you're going to let him shoot. And you have Marv down there. So now you're just clogging that middle. And I know that's been a large talk, but the spacing has just been such garbage the entire year. But then every time, the one thing that's really upsetting is like Sunday's lineup that I loved, and I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Pistons fans enjoyed, only happened because Killian and Stewart were out.
Yeah.
And when they come back, is Monty just going to go back with that same lineup that has just been garbage literally the entire year? Like, all their point differentials, their slants, their skills,
Mm-hmm.
none of them project positively with that lineup. But Monty keeps going back to that lineup. But you asked that question. That would be the
Mm-hmm.
five that I'd stick with. I would shorten that bench. Alec Burke
Mm-hmm.
has not hit. He hasn't been able to hit water. Fallen out of a boat this year, unfortunately. And he was kind of like the truth for us last year. He was such an effective man off the bench for
Mm-hmm.
us. He just
Yeah.
hasn't been that spark. And the other guy that doesn't get enough run, in my opinion, is Sasser. Yeah, I'd like to see Sasser get more of
Mm-hmm.
Killian's minutes, because Killian's at year 4. You already kind of know
Mm-hmm.
what you got. Like, I
Yeah.
think he gets traded and he goes to maybe even a competitive team. Like, throw him on the Thunder, throw him on the Timberwolves, who might need like a defender coming off the bench, guarding the perimeter. Like, those guys could be effective on contending teams, but they are
Mm-hmm.
not going to make a poor team a contending team. There's a difference. There's a difference there. So I would love to
Mm-hmm.
see a Sasser who's in year 1 get more run and kind of see what we
Mm-hmm.
got there, because he's a little hibachi himself, man. He gets hot, like, he can cook. He just
Yeah.
doesn't have the opportunities to do so.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that because like the games I've seen, I would think Ivy would get more run with the lineup, especially after the season he had last year. I thought he really had a good rookie season,
Mm-hmm.
and we seen how he played in college, how explosive he could be offensively. So him and K together, I feel like that's a good 1-2 combo you can have. and
Right.
then you have Duren in the middle. You have Bogdanovic who can spread the floor, and then Asar Thompson, like to me, is defensive
He's a stud.
specialist already. So,
He is.
like, I love his game.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's exceeded all expectations for any Pistons fans, realistically. Like not
Mm-hmm.
getting Wemby was like, man, how do we have the worst record for so long and still get a 5 pick? But like as a 5 pick, like he's a stud. He is an absolute stud. I told somebody that I thought that Duren last year was like Sean Kemp 2.0. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like Azur Thompson is like Sean Marion 2.0 because like the jumper's
Oh,
not there yet, but
yeah.
everything else, all the intangibles, the athleticism,
Mm-hmm.
the veracity on defense, like just his intelligence on the court, like that's all there. Like the shot will come, but like those are the two. I like those two pieces for sure.
Yeah. You can't teach effort and you can't teach defense. That's the two
No,
things you cannot teach. Like, those is just like the things, if you have it, you have it.
yeah,
And which brings me to another question. Did you hear the comments about Gilbert Arenas about Thompson?
I did about how he's he only shooting 10 a game or put up 10 a game, like he's not a centerpiece to build around.
Yeah. How
Mm-hmm.
you feel about that? Because I disagree with that completely. Because I feel like you could be a defensive star on a team going forward. Because
Mm-hmm.
teams need that presence.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was surprising in some capacity because, Gilbert was a star in his own right, but his rookie year, he didn't even average over 10. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
get the same amount of run tick. He definitely didn't play the caliber of defense that Azur Thompson brings to the table. Do I agree that maybe you don't build around him? Sure, because I think you have to build around Cade. He's the number one pick. He's been
Yeah.
inconsistent at times, but he is the guy that could put the ball in the basket, right? And he can effectively, hopefully, run an NBA basketball team once he has NBA talent around him, right? So you're building around him, but part of that build like has to be a core piece. Azura Thompson is a core piece that you're not going to now get rid of. Just
Mm-hmm.
like in some ways, like he's kind of like the villain and kind of like the joke, not the joke of the league at by any means, but like people rip on him a lot is like a Dylan Brooks. A Dylan Brooks was a
Mm-hmm.
really good piece to have with Ja Bain, and then he could just be his defensive presence, right? Like he
Yeah.
never really had to do the scoring piece, but he was still an important cog in his own right. Azura Thompson,
Mm-hmm.
I think, is better than Dylan Brooks, just athletically and basketball wise, and just how he can still put the ball in the rim, close to the hoop. And his mid game
Mm-hmm.
is actually pretty good in the paint. Like his turnaround J's and his fades are actually pretty solid. He just can't go beyond 15 feet right now. So
Yeah.
I thought it was a comment for clicks, and I actually, for all the jokes that are being made about the Pistons and like when you're terrible, like you open yourself up to them. I get it, but I didn't understand the slander to a 19-year-old that is on a really really bad team who is still elevating and executing beyond probably what anybody had anticipated this year. I didn't understand the slight. I didn't understand like why that had to be brought up, but I would disagree because he's a piece that is part of the build around, even if he's not the core central middle piece of it.
Exactly. That's exactly how I thought about it because you have players like you said, Sean Marion, you have the Draymond Greens, you have the Ben Wallaces,
Right.
players that you don't necessarily build around on offense, but you build your defense around that.
Absolutely.
You need players who can anchor defenses, who's able to hold their own with the big time scorers in the league.
Totally agree.
So, next question I wanted to ask you: tell me about your old radio show, Border Wars.
Yeah. So once upon a time in a former life, I used to be a high school teacher in
Okay.
Wisconsin, and we were right on the border state. So it's like right over the
Mm-hmm.
bridge was Michigan, and then I was in Wisconsin teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody where I live now, I'm still in Wisconsin area. We had lived in Florida for 8 years. We came back after we had babies. Everybody around here is just a rampant Packers fan. Like that's really it. Like they love the Bucks
Yeah.
now because they win, but as soon as the Bucks don't win again, like that'll fade to black, and it'll just be Packer insanity.
Mm-hmm.
I've always grown up as a Lions fan, so I've always strongly disliked the Packers for a multitude of reasons. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then we would just argue almost every day. So we coached basketball together. He was a varsity coach. I was assistant. Then I was his JV coach. And so his name is Kaz.
Mm-hmm.
So we would just always talk about what sports are better. At that time, the Tigers were actually good and the Brewers were like not as good, but every once in a while they would have runs. So
Mm-hmm.
we started Border Wars, and the Border War was really about like what team has the most clout, whatever season we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then I remember one season in particular is when the Tigers started to drop off. So this is like the post Leland years. So it's got to be like the 2015, 2016 years where the Tigers go from being relevant to irrelevant, where they've been pretty much since, very similar to the Pistons in some capacity. And our show was more about like how like what does it feel like to now fall off, and the Brewers are actually climbing. So like we juxtapose positions within like a 1 to 2 year period.
Yeah.
And then I would always start off every NFL season like, yo, like this is the year Stafford's got weapons, like we're gonna threaten you guys. And then the Lions would go 7-9, and the Packers would go 12-4 and win the damn division every year. So that's really what our show is predicated on. It was really based off of no matter what side of the track or the bridge you're on, like you're either going to be Detroit, Michigan, everything, or you're going to be Wisconsin, Milwaukee, everything. And we would just go at it. I think we were trying to tap into our inner, like everybody wanted to be first take at that time. So we're trying to have like hot takes.
Yeah.
Which I think if it would have like ran a little bit further, we probably would have toned that down and kind of just been more focused on the actual fandom and not trying to like belittle the other team. But that was what was hot at the time. So that's what we tried to do. So we did that at the local radio station, and then a couple of years, and it was a lot of fun. We did every Friday, and then he ended up leaving the profession, and then it kind of fell off the side. But yeah, that was our radio show, Border Wars. That was a lot of fun, and that was kind of like pre the whole podcast era too. So I feel like if we would have maybe like been more in line with that era, that maybe we would have just continued on and kind of built our own Michigan, Wisconsin fan bases. That way.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like a lot of fun. Because I'm from New York, so
okay,
when I was growing up, we had a lot of debates about who's better between the Knicks and the Nets, and this is when they was in Jersey. So then when they came to Brooklyn, the wars kind of got more intense. So now it's like the fight for New York, who's the better team, and so far it's about even, but the last few years it's probably been the Knicks because the Nets been so much drama going on with them.
Drama. That was like that's an interesting one because that whole situation that happened last year was such a eerie resemblance to their former Big Three combination when they brought in KG, Paul Pierce, and whatnot to try to get out that last ring, and that just didn't work. And then obviously between the drama and the injuries. Nothing just ever really got off the ground. And that kind of seems like Brooklyn's way so far is to try to buy and do it the quick way. And maybe now they're starting to like buy into slowly building an actual contender that's sustainable and maybe not trying to compete with the Knicks market. But that's an interesting one. That would have been interesting banter for a while. I bet you when the Nets were dominant in like the 2000s with Jay Kidd and Kenyon and Jerry Kittles, I'm sure that as a Knicks fan, that probably wasn't a fun conversation to be a part of.
So honestly, all right. So I am a big Jason Kidd fan as well. So it was like it was like 50-50. It was bittersweet for me because like I love Jason Kidd, but it's like you're on the Nets, and I'm a Knicks fan, so it was hard. It was really hard to actually really root for them. So, but all in all, it was a fun era. Especially when they come into town and you can hear Iron Eagle commentating the games. So it was really fun. It was really fun.
That's interesting too because New York, obviously basketball wise, has been hit or miss for a while. But media wise, like they're always relevant because it's a New York market, right? But they've always at least had not the thing that they haven't had, I should say, is a star. They haven't had like the star, and probably since like the John Starks, Patrick Ewing days, when they used to actually battle with the Bulls. And as a Pistons fan, that is the one thing that we have had even when we've been bad, is that we've had some type of star-ish power, or in our most recent futility era, the last decade and a half, like we've had stars at the end of stardom that at least we can semi-rally around, right? Like the Grant Hill era didn't really produce a whole lot of wins, but it was a lot of fun to watch because if they stayed together, who knows what could have potentially happened. And then when they broke down, probably prematurely in some ways, the going to work Pistons when they traded Chauncey for AI, we started to go downhill then. At that point, that's when we stopped really being irrelevant as a contender. But we had
Mm-hmm.
AI, so I mean, you can rally around AI. Then they brought in like Ben Gordon, Charlie Villanueva, um, just pieces that they thought would maybe be like the next iteration of Piston stardom.
Rodney Stuckey.
Rodney Stuckey, yeah, he was supposed
Mm-hmm.
to be the next Chauncey. So like we would rally around like those pieces. You know, they brought in D Rose at the end of his career. T Mac had a revitalized 1 year in Detroit that nobody really remembers. But
Mm-hmm.
those teams were still really bad. You know, Greg Monroe, Andre Drummond,
Blake
Brandon,
Griffin.
you know, like those are all names that we kind of coalesced around and we're like, oh, maybe that's like the next hope. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and now we have, you know, Jaden and Jalen and Cade. But I think collectively as a Piston fan, where you feel the most cheated is that we've had maybe individual parts and pieces of names at the end of their stardom and their careers, but it hasn't elevated close to being relevance for us as an actual basketball organization. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's and like SVG, when Stan Van came in, I think the large majority of us were like, oh man, like that's a legit name. Like SV, like the Van Gundy's no ball. Like we're gonna change now. And he tried, you know, he got us into really terrible contracts. He traded for Blake. We were excited about Blake, even though he's at the end of his career, because like it's Blake and there's some relevancy there. And to be bluntly honest, like Blake gave us his last best season of his career. You know, like
Definitely he
last
did.
relevant year that we had were 42 and 40, I believe, got swept by the Cavs. But that was like the Blake year. He was so good for us. But there was never any vision for the future. And you knew that like as soon as he aged out, we'd be crap again. And I think that's where like the competitive nature of being a Pistons fan is so dulled now, because there hasn't been any competitive within the actual organization. It's been like, oh, let's try this guy. Let's trade for this piece. But like, what's your actual plan? And I think that's
Yeah.
where us in year 4 is the rebuild. We've been excited about the pieces that we've been grabbing from draft days and kind of giving Troy Weaver the benefit of the doubt that like he's driving this ship. He's a good evaluator of talent. Like, yo, like trust the process type of deal. And now 4 years later, it's just like, do we have stars on the team even? Or do we have players who looked really good because they're on a really, really crappy team? And that's, I think, where the frustration disconnect is. So I kind of went on like a random tangents there, but we've always had identified players to rally around with not like a cohesive team. And it just seems like we're just extenuating that exact same playbook
Yeah.
again, where we have pieces but no team. And what does the future look like? And I think when you bring in somebody like Amani Williams, there's always that phantom again. It's like, okay, a legit coach, like he's gonna be able to groom these guys. But now it's just like, have you lost so much already that now this big voice is already going to be drowned out, and like you're probably going to have some fractured relationships? Can you get through this together? I don't know. Like they paid him too much money to get out of it now, but I don't know that
Is he
it's
the highest paid coach right now?
he is, you know, and I don't know, does him being there set us up for success down the road? Like I don't know. So once again, like as Pistons fans, we're stuck in that terrible place of being a bad team and we have no idea what the future looks like. And that's probably like the most frustrating piece.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that because when I see Detroit, I see players with potential, but I don't see like an actual plan of what direction they're trying to go in because they draft a good player and then, but I think it's also a factor of injuries
Right.
because K missed the whole season, so we didn't really get to see him really develop into what he's supposed to be yet. Because I would think all right, last year we're going to see him starting to play together, and then this year is really when he's going to take that leap. And I feel like this season he's really trying to like get his stride back from the injury,
Right.
and then also like they don't have a lot of shooting on the team, so that also clogs the lane for Cade to actually really operate.
And I think that's the piece, man. Like Jerry, like that's the piece. Like, what did they put around him to help him succeed? It's a collection of talent, but they don't complement each other. Like when you have a multitude of guys who can just get to the rim and can't stroke, then you can't have all them playing off of Cade Cunningham, because Cade's actually best game is when he can penetrate and kick. If you are going to make Cade now be the shooter that to try to expand the defense, like 3-point shots actually like that's not his MO. At least today, as of today, that's not. So as a frustration point as a Pistons fan is just like, you have to know your team, right? Like you're a talent evaluator, you have to know their strengths and their weaknesses. And when your best players' weaknesses are X, Y, or Z, then the complementary pieces have to then fit where that player lacks. And instead, like we doubled down on like Wiseman, Bagley, Duran, and Isaiah Stewart. All those guys are essentially do the same things. Like they don't do
Exactly.
anything different. You know what I mean? Killian Hayes doesn't bring you any perimeter shooting. He doesn't, so he's not going to stretch the defense out. Alec Burks hasn't brought you any perimeter shooting. He's not going to stretch the defense out. Every year I read about Isaiah Livers, and I've been a fan since the Michigan year that like his offseason's been so productive and he's really going to take the leap. I'm not seeing it. Like Isaiah Livers is a body on the floor that can give you some decent perimeter defense, and he's going to shoot a lot of bricks. Like he's shooting like 25% from deep, you know? And all these guys have the same inadequacies. So when you sub out one from the other, you're just getting a repeat of the exact same player over and over and over again. And it's just like, who in the world put this roster together? Who put this together? And I think that's where the fanhood now has like been tremendously turned against Weaver, and that, okay, maybe you've been a good evaluator of talent pieces, but we need to bring in somebody who's going to actually be able to like see the missing pieces, use some of the talent that you've acquired that doesn't fit, and let's bring in the complementary pieces that actually elevate the rest of the team. Because right now, to be bluntly honest, like everybody's weaknesses on the team actually just expound everybody else's, and like it shines a spotlight on everybody else's weaknesses that much more because they don't complement each other at all.
Yeah, it's a difference between actually, putting talent together and to like actually have players who can mold together and fit well together.
Absolutely.
All these, like you said, all these players essentially do the same thing. Because like when they got Wiseman and Duran, Bagley, and all that, and I was just thinking like, wow, like that's a lot of players. Sorry about that.
Okay.
That was a lot of players that you essentially have who do the same thing. Right. So why would you bring those players in?
Right. And I can see
I thought Wiseman was a good pickup at first because he's young, he can develop into something. But Bagley, we already kind of know what his game is already, and he's injury prone.
Right.
So it just didn't make sense.
He's going to score. He's going to shoot. He's not going to give you defense. He's not going to make anybody else around him a better. And with Wiseman, and Wiseman, to be honest, like Wiseman's been playing really good ball like over the last week or two because of injuries, and like he runs the floor well. He mops up missed rebounds well. Like you can see a potential there for somebody who's coming off the bench or just being a dog when he comes in. You can see that. When they traded for him, though, they got rid of Saddiq Bey, who I know that they didn't want to pay, and maybe he didn't fit the athletic archetype that they're trying to like build with this, with this vision of what this roster was going to be. But what Saddiq Bey did was bring consistency, professionalism. He didn't turn the ball over. He shot 3-pointers at a decent clip. He actually probably could have stretched the defense. If he's on the team, we're not in a 24-game losing streak. I don't believe. Not because he's an all-star, but because Milwaukee is a great example. The first game against Milwaukee, we're up 10 with 4 minutes left. And then, Giannis was kicked out of the game. And the Pistons, what they're trying to do with their roster structure is they're trying to have kids close games and win games when nobody on that floor has ever won a game on that level before, ever. And that's why they collapse. Every time they have a lead with 4 minutes left in this season, they lose it because NBA players, especially veterans, close games in a different way than they played the first 44 minutes. You have a Saddiq Bey on that team. Maybe he knocks down the three in Milwaukee. That gives you that 13-point cushion now. And all of a sudden, they can come back from that in 4 minutes. But like when you trade for pieces and you get rid of the few veterans that you actually had are growing veterans. Saddiq Bey reminds me somewhat his career path of KCP, Caldwell Pope. He was with the Pistons, true. And then they kind of gave up on him too soon, but like he was just kind of coming into his own, but he was a consistent professional basketball player no matter where he's been. Saddiq Bey is a consistent professional level basketball player every game that he plays, whether or not he fills up the stat sheet or not. Like he's a competent NBA player. They had not always traded to get the same level of competence or exceeded that level of competence in return. And you see that every time in the fourth quarter when they break down. Every time. There's like you're trying to have kids close games and win NBA basketball games when there's not one person on this roster that has ever done that before. Now that Bogdanovich is back, you can maybe put him in there. but that's it. Alec Burks, like maybe once upon a time in
Mm-hmm.
Utah, maybe he was that guy that could help you close down the stretch. He doesn't have
Yeah.
that juice right now. So like you're asking guys who have never won at an NBA level to win games for you and to close.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the roster construction is such a it doesn't make sense as a fan.
Mm-hmm. I actually forgot KCP was on that team. It feel like it's been so long ago since he's been there.
KCP was on that team. Chris Middleton was on that team. You know, like
Yep.
they got rid of a lot
Mm-hmm.
of those cats too early. They drafted Stanley Johnson instead of Devin Booker, who's a Detroit kid. You know, like they've just
Mm-hmm.
had so many organizational pitfalls and missed moves over the last 2 decades or decade and a half, last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
That as of right now, like as a fan for my life, like my patience level is unconditional. No matter, I'm a creature of habit. The Pistons are on, I'm watching.
Yeah.
But realistically, like it's not fair. Like it's not fair to the fanhood. I can. That's probably a whole nother topic. What losing does to your fanhood, your fandom, and the next generation of fans. Because that has such a huge impact. I think about the future. When you're as terrible as you've been over the last 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose a lot of generations of young fans because of your inadequacy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the one thing that really set them back was trading Sadiq Bey
Mm-hmm.
because didn't Sadiq Bey have like a 40 or 50 point
He had a 50
game?
point. He had 51 one.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I
Like
remember
New
that
York,
game,
I
and
believe.
yeah, and I saw the stats, and I'm just like, I knew Sadiq Bey was good. I just
Mhm.
didn't know that he was capable of a big game like that. So I
Yep.
was like, okay, well, he seemed that he could be a piece that you can build around Cade long term. He was still young, and then they gave him away. I was just like, that wasn't a good move.
Right. Exactly. Because they didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to give an extension. You know, like they didn't know if he
Mm-hmm.
was like a max player, and he's probably not a max player. But once
Mm-hmm.
again, like he's a consistent professional athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he goes on the floor, like, like you're gonna get. Um, yeah, and they just kind of gave that away.
Mm-hmm. Like I thought he was good for like probably not a max, but probably 80 million or something like that. He was decent. He was consistent. He was giving you about 16 a game.
Right.
I feel like it should have kept
And a
him.
solid defender on the perimeter for the most part. He can bang.
Yeah.
He's built like a man. Like he's built like he has an NBA body as soon as he came into the league. Came from
Mm-hmm.
Nova, so they can scrap and play D. Yeah, that was a miss. That was a miss in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Wiseman
Mm-hmm.
is Wiseman is Wiseman, and maybe he turns into something, but he's not there yet, and you gave up a lot to get a project.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Last question I want to ask you. So we all know how great Grant Hill was supposed to be.
Mhm.
So how did you feel about when he first came in, and what was the buzz like in Detroit when he got there?
Man, that was okay. So the only thing I can really relate that to at the time, because Jordan was everything in the league at that time when Grant Hill came into the league. That was Jordan was owning the league. So it almost felt like it was like Detroit's piece of like having like a Michael Jordan, right? Like that was like the equivalent. Like MJ is going to have to retire at some point. The ascension here is that Grant Hill will now be kind of the new top dog of the East. Detroit will be
Mm-hmm.
back to being a relevant piece in the Eastern Conference, because after they broke down the pieces after the Isiah Thomas Bad Boys era, the only holdover really was Joey D. That was kind of played alongside Grant for a minute, maybe like a year. Allen Houston came on shortly after there, and that was a buzz that I haven't really felt as a Pistons fan in a long time. I assume that Wemby would have been very similar had we had landed him as the first pick last year, that maybe could have been a comparable vibe.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember a lot of people, especially even in Upper Peninsula, which, like I said, is like 8 hours away from Detroit. And a lot of people lean more to the Wisconsin border because you can go to a Bucks game, in 2 3 hours. You have to take a whole day off to go to a Pistons game. But anyways,
Yeah.
when Grant came, it was so cool to be a Pistons fan. Not only that, but they had
Mm-hmm.
the teal jerseys, and it was just kind of like
Them
there's something.
Taylor jerseys was really nice.
No
Mm-hmm.
doubt. And they brought them back, last year.
Mm-hmm.
But the buzz was huge. And I think when he got the co-rookie of the year with Jay Kidd at that time, I remember there
Mm-hmm.
being I remember like the Mitch Albums of the world, like the sports writers. Drew Sharp. Um, I think he was with the Detroit News. But I just remember like a lot of people in Detroit feeling like slighted. Like there's no way there's a co-rookie of the year. Like this kid, in Auburn Hills is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then when that didn't work out the way that it did, obviously when he signs and gets traded to Orlando, it's like, man,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be irrelevant forever. Like it seems like that bad boy era is never going to come back. Little
Yeah.
did we know at that time that piece brought us Ben Wallace, right? And Ben Wallace
Mm-hmm.
becomes like a core piece of everything that's going to be great over the next 8 years, but you don't know that at the time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I do remember the Grand Hill era. I remember having the Grand Hill shirt. I remember having the NBA Jam because he was like it was him or Joey D that you could pick. So having like the NBA Jam shirt,
Yeah.
going to school and rocking that, and yeah, that was a good era. But injuries, and then just in terms of being able to keep them distant and work out, and then hindsight, that actually works out better for the Pistons in the long run. Which is a weird thing to say because at the time it was incredibly detrimental to a lot of Pistons fans' mental health.
Yeah. I mean, they ended up beating Grand Hill's Magic in the playoffs, so
Mm-hmm.
it worked out.
It
Mm-hmm.
did work. Oh yeah, it definitely worked out, no doubt. And
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy like to think what Grant Hill might have been without those injuries. Like that's a wild piece because he did so many intangibles aside from filling in, putting the ball in the basket. He was good. And then if he's there and he's healthy, Grant Hill, and you have a T Mac who's healthy, that could have been a problem for a long time. But unfortunately, bodies break down and there's no control over that piece of it. But that was a fun era for basketball.
Yeah, unfortunately, Grant Hill was probably the greatest what if story in NBA history, I would
Yeah,
think.
no doubt. I'm trying to think who was the kid that played not kid, Darren Williams. Darren
Oh
Williams,
yeah.
he's another guy that maybe not like the same kind of explosion, but like he had such a high ceiling, and then all of a sudden, it was just over so fast for somebody like him. And that's always one of those like, damn, like what could that have been? What could that have turned into? But such as life.
Yeah, he was. I think he was in the debate for the best point guard in the league at the time with him and Chris Paul.
Yep.
And then he went to the Nets. He was still pretty good, but he started to fall off a little bit, but it wasn't too noticeable. And then after that he just went to the Cavs, and it was over from there.
Right.
Never heard from him after that.
So like that happens with some of these. They're like shining stars, but they're like fallen stars, right? Because like they're bright for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
For like somebody like a Brown who's been shining light for 20 some odd years, like that has to be part of like a legacy conversation, in my opinion, is like how long you can do this for at that level. That has to be a part of it, because as great as Grant Hill was, he was great for such a small period of time. So you recognize his greatness, you appreciate his greatness, but when you think of the greatness thresholds of like Mount Rushmores of NBA players, like he can't be on there because there's no longevity to even see anything come to like real fruition. And that was really not his fault, but that's just a reality of bodies breaking down and kind of what happened to him.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely has to be in like the legacy conversation.
Right.
Definitely. But I want to thank you for being on. It was a pleasure having you talking to Pistons. Like I never met a Pistons fan before, so it was really refreshing to hear that.
There's actually a lot of us, and just like the Detroit Lions fans, like they're taking over every NFL stadium. There's a lot of. You got to remember, man, like when the Pistons were relevant with like those going to work Pistons, we sold out every games for multiple years. There's like at the Palace was a problem for other teams. Like that was a critical home court advantage. And I haven't been to the Little Caesars Arena yet, but I can't imagine that there's any energy there because they've never had a winner there. But there are a lot of Pistons fans just kind of hanging out, waiting to like rock that red, white, and blue again. But a lot of us are in hiding right now.
I understand. I know y'all. I know once y'all get good again, y'all gonna be tearing the city up.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. I hope to come back on here and be like, yeah, like now we're a decent team again. Let's have some good questions. So not to talk about what we've been talking about. Really is the net.
Yeah, definitely would love to have you back on soon.
Yes, sir. All right, I appreciate you, Jared.
No problem. Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.